Power of Kroll, the fifth serial of the 16th season of Doctor Who, the penultimate part of the Key to Time season, and it was first broadcast in four parts from the 23rd of December 1978, hey, happy Christmas, to the 13th of January 1979. In this particular serial, the Doctor and Romana end up on the third moon of planet Delta Magna in search of the fifth piece of the Key to Time. They venture outside, but finding it to be mostly a kind of swamp moon, they have to leave K9 behind inside the TARDIS and set off to find the fifth piece. In doing so, they end up separating once again, while the Doctor finds a mysterious methane farm run by a man named Thorne, played by Neil McCarthy, who I think was supposed to be someone famous. I gather he did several roles within Doctor Who itself, but granted he was a very big actor at the time. Also a man named Fenner, played by Philip Maddock, and another man named Dugeen, played by John Leeson. To which, since they couldn't use K9 in this story, presumably they couldn't use K9 because it's a swamp planet or a swamp moon, but they didn't want John Leeson to miss a payday, so presumably wrote him into the story, which I do like. I feel it is good in here. Meanwhile, Romana ends up coming across a man who used, from what I can understand, he used to be part of the methane farm, but they became disillusioned with it. His name is Ron Dutz, who's played by Glenn Owen, and he is seemingly trying to sell kind of weapons and secrets to the Swampies, kind of humanoid creatures who live on this moon that basically look just like humans except they're bright green. Now, this was the story that I was probably most apprehensive about. I've heard a lot of people say that the Power of Kroll is infamous for its bad effects. And in some parts of it, I think people are a little bit too harsh. There were a couple of moments when I did actually think, yeah, some of these effects, they're not the best, but they're not brilliant, but then there were certain parts that I will admit possibly didn't look the best. Now, let's start with the good stuff. Because, once again, I ended up watching this with several family members as well, and the one thing they will admit they were quite impressed by was the makeup or the body paint on the Swampies, which, considering that, can't have been very pleasant for the actors involved, given that they were in the middle of a swamp, essentially in shorts, shirts or togas, and covered in green paint. That had to be freezing. It can't have been very pleasant for the actors involved. But to have the paint done as well as that, and to not have it come off, especially when they're fairly walking around waist deep in water for most of the storyline, it was quite impressive. I will admit also, while the gas rig itself is quite evidently fake in some of the wide shots, it's a very kind of Thunderbird style effect with the models and the puppet that they used for the creature, which I need to give a brief rundown here. When Romana is found by the Swampies, she is briefly offered up as a sacrifice to what they consider a god, a creature named Kroll. And Kroll is essentially just a giant squid with a load of legs that seems to attack the land and seems to be able to detect vibrations on the surface. And I will admit, while I'll come to the kind of effects of it later on, I will admit, when they had to actually use practical effects, like within the base, when they had its kind of tentacles crashing through the pipes, I actually thought that was pretty impressive, and some of the practical effects they actually did manage to do with it, I did actually think were pretty good. I mean, just even to have a person kind of crushed against the wall by a giant tentacle, I will admit I thought that was pretty good, but there is, as I said, some pretty bad effects throughout the storyline. I mean, the one that I personally thought was worst came in part 3, and let me just say, I thought part 3 had some good stuff to it as well. I mean, the Doctor, Romana, and Ron Dutz, they end up getting essentially held at, spear point by the Swampies, and they're essentially tied up in a room, and it's said that when the sunlight comes through a window in the ceiling, that will cause the plants to start to grow and will essentially rip them apart, rip their spines apart. Which I thought was a rather inventive use of the kind of scenario. But what ultimately saves the Doctor, Romana, and Dutt is a storm. Which, okay, fair enough. I mean, okay, the storm happens, the plant retracts in, and the Doctor is able to escape and free the other two. Fair enough. But when they used lightning strikes, I mean, lightning can be difficult to get right, and for special effects of the 1970s, I'm not going to push it too hard, but it was very evident the bolt lightning was just kind of drawn on the screen, and it was just very clearly a scribble, which I'll admit didn't look very realistic and kind of sucked me out of the moment. But the other thing that my family members noticed, and that I will admit they did kind of have a point about it, is the effects on the Kroll puppet itself. I mean, I felt for most of the time it wasn't as bad as people were saying it to be, but yeah, there were occasions when it didn't look quite right with the horizon. There were times when you could kind of clearly see the divide of where it was supposed to be coming out of the water and where it actually was. And I mean, is this the weakest story of the Keystone series? Yeah, it kind of is. I will admit there were some parts of it I did end up liking. I mean, as I said, the torture scene, that's fairly inventive, and when they were kept inside the base, they did manage to do some good stuff with it. But then again, there were some parts to me that just kind of looked a little off. Also, the ending I kind of feel like is a bit glossed over, in that throughout of it, kind of Thorn treats the Swampies very much like a minority, like we did, and humanity did up until about the 1950s, which, yeah, we're not particularly proud of that. He ends up looking down on them and treating them rather poorly, and kind of, towards the end he ends up shooting Dageen, and then ends up getting killed by Kroll himself. And Fenner, they managed to sort the problem. They managed to destroy Kroll and get the piece of the key to time, which turned out to actually be inside Kroll itself. Seemingly, a giant squid had eaten the piece of the key to time and had become Kroll. Which, okay, fair enough. But then, once they've got the piece, the Doctor and Romana just can leave, and they tell Fenner that eventually he'll come to be picked up. The Sons of Earth, or Earth itself, will come to collect him. But then they just kind of head out of there, and I'm just left thinking, the Swampies that are around him inside this base, weren't they just leading a revolution a second ago? Are you just leaving this guy along with several... I mean, fair enough, it may just be that the Swampies have kind of abandoned their revolution, but it's just like, you're leaving him essentially in a room with wolves, aren't you? It just kind of feels a little odd to me that these people were storming the base, and now you've got what you came for, and you're just going to leave him here. Okay, fair enough. I mean, yeah. I'll admit, some of the story beats don't quite add up. Some of the effects, I admit, are pretty bad. I mean, do I think it's the worst classic Doctor Who story I've seen? No, I'd probably still give that dishonour to Warriors of the Deep. Mainly because that one had some good ideas, but it squandered all of them and it just didn't work well. This has a few good ideas, but the effects kind of drag it back. So that's my thoughts on the power of Kroll. Now, I've only got one more story to go in the Key to Time season, and that is the Armageddon Factor. So when I've watched that through, I'll let you know, and we'll see how everything stacks up. But for now, yeah, the power of Kroll, I'm afraid it is pretty bad. I mean, if you want to check it out, fair enough, but do so at your own risk. Anyway, that's my thoughts on part number 5 in the Key to Time series, The Power of Kroll. Anyway, till I watch the Armageddon Factor, see ya.